Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Real inspiration for real innovators. If you're looking for innovation and leadership transformation, your journey starts now.
Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Born. If you haven't listened to the podcast in a while, or you've only listened once, I want to encourage you, go ahead and save this to your listening so that we can talk to you much more. We have some incredible guests coming on throughout the year, and I want to make sure that we are saved. In addition to that, go ahead and leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts so that other innovators like you can find us. That would be a huge favor. It helps others find us really easily. I'm so excited to introduce you to my guest today, Antonio Garrido. He is an author of My Daily Leadership. It's a powerful roadmap for leadership success, and he's the founder and president of My Daily Leadership. Welcome to the podcast, Antonio. It's so great to have you here.
Hello, Natalie. I'm delighted to be here. I'm a fan of the podcast, so thank you very much for the invitation. I hope we can manage to dredge up something really interesting and useful for your audience, because I know they're a good bunch.
Yeah, well, with that introduction, we have to, right? So I want to just want to. I have a feeling we're going to have a lot of fun today. I would love for you to just share a little bit about your background. I was obviously looking into you before the podcast, and you have just a fascinating story. So I thought it'd be really interesting, even as we've talked different times, you've been all over the world. So I'd love to just learn a little bit about your backstory.
Well, it's probably only interesting to me and probably my mum, but I'll try and give you the expurgated version. So a million years ago, because I'm fairly ancient, but a million years ago, when I came out of university, I was an architect. So I started life, or my professional career rather, as an architect. Between you and me and the gatepost, Natalie, I suspect I wasn't a very good architect. But anyway, there you are. Whilst I was studying, I had this crazy dream and imagining that we would all come out of university and we would be designing airports and cathedrals and museums, and rather than Mrs. Miggins's kitchen extension. So anyway, I was an architect for a little while, more by luck than by design. I promise you, I found myself working for an organization that had the most phenomenal chap in charge, a guy called Alan, who was just a phenomenal leader. And he saw something in me that I don't think anybody else kind of ever had. Now I think about it, we probably just thought this chap is a terrible designer. Let's see if we can find something else for him to do. I'd been there a little while, and he kept promoting me every 5 minutes. We don't have time to kind of go into why that was, or at least why he told me that was. But after a couple of years, he said, look, I want to give you a division to manage instead of because first I was in the drawing office, and then he took me off the board to manage the drawing office. And then he said, I want to give you a department, which he gave me. And then he said, I want to give you a division. And then if that goes well, I want to give you, a country or two. So would you go back to university and study, get some kind of business, like an MBA or something, some qualification that kind of makes you sound a little bit credible in that regard, and we'll pay, and your job's here for you and all of that. So I did that, and I did strategic market management and with international studies. So that was international business. I'm sorry. So that was good. Ended up running to Europe. So just came in entry level in the job, and then ended up kind of running part of Europe over a few years. I then was headhunted, moved on, and I just kept moving into bigger and bigger and bigger organizations, bigger and bigger and bigger roles. I was choosing the roles to go to based entirely on the leader. I was making the decision based entirely on the leader, and therefore by default the core values of the organization. And if they were a little, just in the slightest bit woolly about what they might be, I wouldn't take the job, right? So maybe a little bit more or less by luck and more by design. But I found myself working for some phenomenal leaders. Anyway, as I mentioned earlier, I am fairly ancient, and we have 4 children, and they were about to go off to university. So we were going to be empty nesters, my wife and I. And we said, again, there's a whole backstory to it. Let's go and quote unquote semi-retire in Miami because the weather's pretty nice there. hurricanes notwithstanding every 5 minutes. But other than that, the weather was fairly nice. We bought a sales training company so that we could go and quote unquote semi-retire. That sales training company that we bought did terribly well, and I wrote 2 books. They became, bestsellers on the back of that. And that company did very, very, very well. But all the while, and then we were coaching and training leaders and so on. But all the while, I thought I just learned so much about leadership, and I just feel like I have that to share. So I wrote this 3rd book, which is the one that you mentioned in the intro. Thank you very much for that. And on the back of that, because I didn't want to confuse the brands, we just set up a new company on the back of that. And this company has taken off like a train as well. So I find myself very much trying to emulate and apply the best lessons of the best leaders that I worked for. And I was fortunate enough that at the time I was selecting which companies to work for, which leaders to work for, I guess. They were all very much kind of ahead of the curve. I mean, now leadership is kind of a thing, right? And it's very in vogue to say you're having leadership coaching and training and so on. But in those days, possibly not so much. So I was just incredibly fortunate. And now I try and pass those messages around to people who are, interested enough to give me a jolly good listening to every now and again. So I guess that's my backstory, if that makes sense.
It totally does. It's awesome. Well, there's something in there that I want to take a moment to pause on and just talk about a little bit, because I actually wrote a blog. It's been a while, probably like 5 or 7 years ago, but it was called Choose a Leader, Not a Job. And I think that that is one thing you've applied, it sounds like, throughout your entire career. And it's really been a launching pad for you. And so I want to pause here, because not everybody realizes how important that principle is,
Right.
and how powerful that principle is when someone is willing to invest in you, to see you, and to grow you. I mean, investing in your education, moving you up through the ranks, like those things don't just happen to anyone.
No.
It's a pretty powerful moment when you kind of pause on what you talked about. And I'd love for you to go a little bit further into that, to say, well, how did you choose a leader? How did you know that this person was going to be someone that would support and back you?
So I guess it's a little bit like, are you married? I don't know.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so I am too, right? And isn't it interesting how you can go to a wedding? I love weddings. Weddings is just a hoot. They're my favorite kind of celebration. I love going to weddings. And isn't it interesting how sometimes you can see, the couple, the nervous couple at the at the altar, right? And you're there because you must know them at least reasonably well, right? And they're kind of all over each other, right? And so you think, oh gosh, these two really, really love each other. And then I remember, you must think now I'm ever such a cynic. I'm not really. I'm quite an optimist, really, and a believer in human nature. But I've been to weddings, and I've said to somebody sat next to me, whispered, by the way, I give it a year, right? And you see these couples, right? And they get married, and they're full of all of the joys of spring and so on. And then sort of life happens and things get a little tricky. Well, think about that in terms of leadership. You go to a job interview and everybody sounds like everybody loves each other, right?
Yeah.
And then they do. And it's easy to be a good leader when things are easy, right? It's easy to be a good wife when things are easy. It's easy to be a good husband when things are easy. But those people, like my mum and dad, had my mum not died a few years ago, my father's 91 this year. They had been, how old's my sister? Like together for like 60 odd years, right? Married forever, well, until the point that she passed away. And had she not passed away, they would still be married now. And yet they kind of bicker and they kind of row about things. And there's always a little bit of aggravation going on kind of an underlying level. And, she used to call him dumb for doing certain things, and he would call feckless for doing other things, right? But anyway, here's the point. They shared the same core values, right? And because they shared the same core values, they were together forever. Come back to those people that you see getting married, and you say, I give it a year, because they didn't share the same core values. And if you share the same core values, you can weather practically anything. But if you don't, you can hardly weather anything, right? So come back to the organization. We've all heard the expression, you join a company but leave a manager. So like the blog that you wrote 5 or 6 years ago, my belief was always, you join a manager or you join a leader, all right, and then you leave a company, right? And hopefully you leave it in a better place than when you arrive. But the point is these core values. So if I was being interviewed, and listen, when we take on new clients all of the time, I ask them questions just to establish whether or not we're even going to work with them. But I used to ask these questions of people that were interviewing me. Now, as I can hear, or I can already hear them in my head, and they sound very arrogant. They're going to sound worse when they come out of my mouth. But I think if you're going to spend so long with an organization, it's important to get them right, right?
Right.
So I would say to them things like, or I would ask them rather, I would say, what are your core values, right? What are the core values of the organization? I'll tell you a great answer I heard to one of those questions in a minute if you're interested. I don't think I've ever told anybody this answer. But I said, what are your core values, your personal core values? And if they struggle to express them, that would kind of be a red flag. And then I said, well, what are the core values of the organization? And if they struggle to express those, that's 2 strikes, 1 more and you're out, right? And I'm out of here. So I would ask them about their own core values. I would ask what the core values of the organization were. And if they and struggled to express them, in other words, they weren't on the tip of their tongue, then how were they telling everybody else, those things that were important? And then I would ask things like, how good a leader do you want to be? Do you want to be? This is me being interviewed, right? But I'm interviewing them. I'm saying, how good a leader do you want to be? They go, what does that mean? I would say, well, do you want to be a good leader or an exceptional leader? Do you want to be best in class? Do you want to be world class? And if they didn't say world class, I don't know that I was interested, right? Because
Wow.
I didn't want, please don't, I told you it sounded arrogant. It sounded arrogant in my own brain,
I
right?
think it sounds awesome because now you know how far they're going to go as a leader, and you can
Right.
only go as far as the leader's willing to take you.
Right. And then I would ask questions like, and this is genuine, right? Not to try and trap them, but just to think, okay, because when you have an interview, when you are being interviewed, it's such a narrow view.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm interviewing people, we interview, we assess, we do other interviews, we ask them to interview us. We say, I remember I was interviewing somebody once and I said, point to a door. And he pointed to a door and I went, we'll go in there and go and talk to whoever's behind that door and ask them what they think of the organization, right? I mean, it takes some bravery to do that.
Yeah.
So I would say to a leader, what's your strategy for truth? And what's
Mm-hmm.
your strategy for trust, right? And if they didn't know how to answer those questions, then, I wasn't terribly interested. So I think I was rather discerning in the organizations I went to work for, largely based on, so the first chap that I mentioned to you, that great guy, he would say things like, and I think, this is really, really important. We still talk about it today, even though that was years and years and years, decades ago, crikey. He would say things like, what have you learned? This is what he would say. It's a little grisly, right? And I'm not the author of it, so there's no pride of authorship here, but he would say things like, so Antonio, what have you learned this week? Or sometimes he would put it as, where have you failed this week, right? And celebrated that failure, celebrated that learning point, because he would say, because unless you've amassed a great personal wealth within the last 24 hours, in other words, unless you've won the lottery, he said, the only advantage you have today over yesterday is what you've learned. The only advantage you have today over yesterday is what you've learned. Otherwise, he said, you're just a day closer to dead, right? Which I know, as I say, is a little grisly, but it is at the same time true, right?
Yeah.
But what that does, and he wouldn't just say it to me, because another one of his favorite expressions is, don't say much, but say it all over the place and in 1,000 different ways. He would say that to everybody. So build a culture of learning and development and growth. I wrote for Forbes just recently. Did you know there are companies, and I don't know that Google started it, but Google have it as a policy of theirs. Are you familiar with the 20% rule?
Yes.
Right. So they give everybody a day a week, right? 20% of the work week to just work on projects that aren't got nothing to do with their business card, their title, their hierarchy, just stuff that just kind of fires them up and excites them. And I've never worked for a company that's been quite so generous with their time with people. But how cool is that, right? To just have people get creative because you never know what might happen. So people like that who are real, they really walk the talk. They don't just talk the talk. They walk the talk about learning and development and creativity. And you talked about innovation and leadership. Well, you can't have innovation can only thrive in cultures, environments, and situations where people feel safe. Because if they don't feel safe, then how can they be creative? Because if they're fearful of failing, fearful of falling over, fearful of making a mistake, fearful of some kind of, a penalty or retribution, then innovation doesn't happen. Innovation happens when you allow people, perhaps in Google's way, you kind of mandate it, or you allow people to try and get creative, and it's okay to fall down. And do you have children? I don't know. Do you have children?
I got two.
How old?
14 and 9.
Okay, well, when you're 9-year-old, right? Well, when we all were learning to walk, right? So I have 4, and around their 12-month birthday, their first year birthday, something inside us all says, you know what? Maybe it's time to walk now, right? And that's where our troubles really start, right? When before babies start to move and crawl, life is so easy because they are where you last left them, right? That's where they are. And then when they start to move, right, things get interesting and not in a good way. When they're about 1, right, they decide it's time to walk, and then you have to put round soft things on every hard edge and corner that they could possibly reach. But anyway, when they first try and walk, we know you did it, I did it, everybody that did it. They fell down a lot. They didn't just say, oh, it's time to walk, and got up and just wandered off, right? They fell down countless times. And at no point ever said, you know what, let's give up on this. Walking's not for me, right? And we were determined little buggers, right? When we were like 1-year-old. But it's the same for reading, writing, talking, using a fork, driving a car. All these things are difficult. And if your 9-year-old, did you say 9-year-old was the youngest?
Yeah.
Well, when 9-year-old was learning to ride a bike, if they fell off their bike, you didn't deride him or her, you didn't punish him or her, you just wiped them down, gave them a cookie and a hug, and said, let's do it again, right? And because what's the best way? The very best way to learn how to not fall off your bike is to fall off your bike. It's the only way to learn how to not fall off your bike. You learn to not fall off your bike by falling off your bike. And I think you learn to do everything that's useful, that's tricky and difficult, by failing, right? And so you can't win if you're not prepared to lose, if you're not prepared to fail. So I would, if any leader sounded anything like I just have in the last 10 minutes, I'm in, where do I sign?
Yeah.
Where can how do I sign up? And if they sounded anything like I'm in charge around here, I judge myself by my intentions and everybody else by their actions. And we have a strict hierarchy here, and everybody does what they're told. We're all about KPIs, and we manage people hard, and we don't coach them, and we're not into training development, and that's a waste of time and all of that. I'm like, taxi, right? So I'm out. So I hope that helped in some way.
That does. I think that's really important. And it's a very powerful principle that you're leaning into. I can't believe it. We're almost out of time. I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you about leadership journaling. You talk about it as a critical place for leaders to be able to future-proof themselves. And I think that I want to spend a little bit of time before we go to, our separate ways on seeding that into people and helping them understand, what does leadership journaling actually do, and how can it make you a better leader over time?
I'll try and get all of this done in 6 minutes. Okay. So again, a million years ago, a different leader asked me, hey, Antonio, do you journal? And I just been given a fairly sizable job, which between you and me and the gatepost, I was ill prepared for. But anyway, I got the job. On my second day, he asked me whether or not I journaled, and I didn't. And he asked me why I didn't, and I couldn't think of any decent reason why not. So the first thing that came out of my mouth was probably because I'm not a 16-year-old Victorian schoolgirl. I mean, I didn't even know kind of what journaling was or who might do it, right? He said, well, go and find the 8 most successful people that you can in any walk of life and ask them if they journal.
Oh, wow.
So I said, okay. So I wandered off to find the 8 most successful people that I could possibly imagine. And of course, they all journal. And if you think about it, and everybody, politicians, sports personalities, the ones that are at the very top of the game, entertainers, they all journal, right? Businessmen, if you think of, if I asked you to pick 6 of the biggest leaders in the world that you can think of, you're going to think of the Bezoses and the Jobs, right? And you're going to think of the Musks, and they all journal, right? And is it a coincidence? Oprah, if you Google the benefits of journaling or who famous journals, there's billions of hits, not with an M, but with a B. So I thought to myself, although I didn't have the internet then because I was, as you know, I'm a fossil. I thought, well, maybe there's something to it. So I went back to my boss and said, okay, I'll do it. Okay, I'll do it. Thinking there must be a link between, it can't be a coincidence that all of these people do and they're successful. So I said, but I don't know what, and this is what we hear all the time. We don't know what to journal. We don't know how much to write. We don't know what to write about. We don't know how to do it. And if you can help us how to do it, yeah, we'll give it a whirl. We say, okay, great. If you'll give it a whirl and you'll stay open-minded, we're with you. And if you go to our website, there's loads of free downloads and stuff, but I'll read the book and it gives you lots of pointers. But the thing about journaling is we don't just do it because it's something, vogue or easy to do. It's not. It's difficult, right? And it's going to take some effort, but no more effort than it takes to brush your teeth. And I imagine every day you brush your teeth, you've got a lovely smile. Every day, a day where you wouldn't brush your teeth. Even on your birthday and Hanukkah and Christmas, right? You will still brush your teeth. So we ask leaders to, if you want to be a world-class leader, if you want to genuinely be best in class, here's what we'd like you to do. Because, by the way, this is to build self-awareness and emotional intelligence. So an EQ trumps IQ by a factor of about 400, right, in terms of successful leadership. So we will say, at the end of every day, Natalie, just do this. Just get your journal out and give yourself a report card for the day. No words, just go, yeah, probably B-. I'll give myself a B- for the day. And that's okay. Don't berate yourself. Don't beat yourself up. Just go, okay, B-. What could you have done more of or less of? What shouldn't you have done, or what should you have done perhaps to make that B- a B or a B+ or an A-? What could you have done a little bit more of?
Yeah.
When you start to do that with some regularity, and I don't mean phenomenal regularity, I mean about 10 or 12 days, right? Very short period of time. Here's what happens. You start, so that's hindsight, by the way, because wisdom comes from evaluated experience. If you take one thing away from today, it's that wisdom comes from evaluated experience. So a journal is just a place to hold all of that evaluated experience. So if all we just do at the end of the day is go B-, why? Well, because of this. What could I have done more of, less of, this, and this? You do that for a couple of weeks. Here's what then happens. Frank walks into your office and says, hey, Frank, hey, Antonio, what are we going to do about insert issue, right? You will find then situationally, you will say to yourself almost subconsciously, because very quickly your subconscious goes, oh, this is the gig now, is it? We have to think about what we're doing. Okay. And then what happens is you kind of say to yourself, well, I could respond to Frank this way, or future Antonio in about 4 hours' time will give me a better grade if I respond in this way as opposed to this way. So I'm a bit more intentional and authentic about how I'm going to respond to Frank. You do that for a couple of weeks. So that hindsight, looking in the rearview mirror, 2020 vision, right? So that hindsight leads to situational insight where you go, I could do this, but I'm not going to do that because that's going to mean a poorer grade. So I will do this instead. You do that for 2 weeks. So we're now, nearly 4 weeks into the gig, but not 2 years, just 2 weeks. What then happens is when you then, for couple of weeks and then another couple of weeks, you've looked backwards every day, you're giving yourself a grade. What could I have done more of? You'll start to improve your score because you'll start to make better decisions in the moment situationally. What then happens is you start to develop a little bit of foresight. If I don't address this, this is going to be an issue and Frank's going to come into my office and ask me about it. So you start to look forwards a little bit more. So looking backwards helps you deal with now, and then it helps you look a little bit forward. So hindsight develops insight, which develops foresight, and then resight, so you can decide where to go next. So just start like that. And then after about 3 or 4 weeks, all we then ask you to do is, rather than just talk to your subconscious before you go to sleep at night, in the morning, just be intentional about your day. Just write, the one thing I have to do before I go to bed tonight is, just write that one thing down. If you can then start to add a little bit of gratitude in what you're grateful for, right? And in the book, we talk a lot about gratitude, then you've cracked it, and then it will start to evolve and develop. And if you need somebody to hold your hand every day, we have a whole 2-year program of leadership journal prompts that develop you along the model that we have for world-class leaders. So did that answer the question?
It did. That's very powerful. And as I listened to you talk about that, that's so wise to start to anticipate the right decisions to make, because you've been kind of looking across the lay of the land every single day, and how powerful that is to look back,
Yeah.
look present, and then look forward. So I'm super excited. That's a practice I'd like to implement in my life. Yeah.
Go onto the website, download 30 days, have a look, check it out.
Okay, give us the website. Tell us where to find and follow you.
Well, the book's called My Daily Leadership. The business is called, well, all the W's, www.mydailyleadership.com, all one word. My name is Antonio. So if you want to email me, and please do, and just mention Natalie's name, and then we'll look after you. Antonio@mydailyleadership.com. There's loads of free resources on there. Listen to the book, perhaps. It's available in paper, electronic, audio. I narrated this one.
Nice.
Yeah, because I think it needs my accent to tell my jokes. I think
That's right. I tell you what, like you are just naturally funny, which makes it so enjoyable. But I've found myself trying not to crack up so that it doesn't interrupt what you're saying. But it's a blast. So I can only imagine that listening to the audio of this would be also very awesome. I am a member of Audible, so I'm going to go check it out there right after this. That's really, really cool. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your commitment to leaders and to training leaders. It's something that we need more of. We need more people leading at higher levels. We need more people being intentional about their leadership. And it does not go unnoticed how important this topic is and how much we need that. So thank you so much for your time today, Antonio.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed it. Thanks very much. See you soon.
Absolutely. Well, to our listeners, thank you for joining the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Remember, don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.
Thank you for joining us for the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our show on iTunes. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Innovation Meets Leadership, and visit our site at innovationmeetsleadership.com for more innovation resources.
Hey, my new book is out, Set It on Fire, The Art of Innovation. Click on the link to learn more. And don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.